Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books.
Okay, Daniel, you're good.
All right. Well, my name is Daniel. Well, a lot of people call me Daniel Laughingbird on Facebook. And I'm here with Dave and with Hanjiro, and they wanted me to give them an interview to help them explain what the Raven Tribe is all about. So I had a couple of questions for both of you guys, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Sounds good. All right. Good. So first of all, I'm sure a lot of people know who you guys are, but I wanted to get an idea of whose idea it was to make this a tribe. I mean, I know you guys have your own schools, you teach, or have taught in the past, and wanted to create some sort of a fraternity for people, to come together with the same spirit. So whose idea was it to try to create something bigger than just a school?
Well, I think the idea for the tribe morphed out of the old Raven Tactical International organization for the most part. And what happened, Daniel, was that our organization, referring to Raven Tactical at the time, was run very differently than a lot of other martial arts or, self-defense groups that I had been part of. I've been part of many of them, and I think that the Raven Tactical group really meshed well as a family. We really went out of our way to help each other out, and at times it seemed like that is where the real value to the organization was. Curriculums and training manuals and things like that all kind of became secondary to the camaraderie, within the group. And eventually we just kind of felt like it needed to just evolve in that direction altogether. And so to make it a little bit more formal, we kind of made the transition from Raven Tactical to the Raven Tribe.
And so what happened to Raven Tactical? Are you guys still having instruction through that school, or are you retired from that, or are you focusing mainly on the tribe?
I am, for the most part, retired from Raven Tactical as a trainer. I still do some curriculum development, and there are still Raven Tactical instructors that are very active, and I will still assist them with everything. But I don't take an active part in that as an organization anymore, other than occasionally designing some curriculum, helping out the existing instructors. We haven't graduated any new instructors in quite some time for that reason. Again, because I'm basically retired from kind of public teaching in that sense. So when I met Hanjiro, we started training together, and we both saw the value in, this vision for the new organization. And so we decided to go in together on it. And so we're the co-founders of the new Raven Tribe.
So it's really just the two of you. I shouldn't say just, but it's the two of you that are heading this up, that are spearheading this.
Yes. We make, the decisions that we need to make for the tribe and just kind of logistical things. But there is a senior advisory board for the tribe, and there are some senior members, and they all have a voice, and we take everybody's voice, very, very seriously. We don't try to, ignore any of those voices. They're there for a reason. They're on an advisory board because we want them to advise. They all come with great, backgrounds and bring a lot to the table. So we definitely hear that voice.
Okay, good. That's kind of what I'm looking for, is to see, it's not just two people. It's like a whole group of people that are coming together, and you guys are more or less at the head, but it's not just the two of you. It's not just like a little fun project. This is a serious thing that you guys are doing. So when did you guys get this idea? Was it pretty recent, or was it, years ago, and you just took this time to formulate it into a working organization, or was it really recent?
Well, I think that, like I mentioned, it evolved out of the Raven Tactical group, and that's probably been about 2 years in the making. I would say I hooked up with Hanjiro somewhere around that time, and the influence that he's had on me personally really helped me to kind of take that next step into evolving this into the tribe concept rather than the old Raven Tactical organization.
Just teaching, right? Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because I was sort of there in the beginning when you guys first started. When you first put the call out that you want to start this, and I remember you saying that you're retired and everything. I think that's interesting to note, that you're focused on mentoring the group and stuff like that. Now, what is different about this group? I mean, there's a lot of organizations in the world, a lot of martial arts fraternities. There's a lot of different groups you guys could have personally joined to, do what you're doing. Why did you feel it was important to start your own? Why did Hanjiro join you? Why did you, decide to do it as Raven Tribe instead of, World Martial Art Foundation or whatever it might be?
Well, I just wanted to be in charge. If I can't be in charge of the group, what's the point? No, I'm just kidding. Hanjiro, do you want to field this one first, please?
There's a multi-part question. So the generalities of it, first of all, let's qualify this as this is still an evolving project, and it's by no means fully fleshed out. We're still looking to see kind of the direction that this goes and trying to refine things. The general goal that we had was community above all else, in service to the community above all else. Now, the term is very general, community. People ask, what community? Whose community? Where? All of those things are left open for that reason. And that's part of how Mr. Vargas and I came together. Is I came from a very closed, insular Japanese martial arts society where you had these groups that, you don't train with other people from other schools and this and that, very, very insular. And I bought into it for years. And then I still actively have matches and challenge matches and that kind of stuff. And I wanted to see something outside of that and not in a confrontational way, not in this, as we see on social media, this kind of throw down, shit talking kind of thing, but in a cooperative type of community where people come together and put aside style and dogma and all that kind of stuff and look at those two guiding principles of coming together for community to do more for community, like come together and do something for the betterment of everyone. So that's first and foremost. So this is growing because that is such a huge goal and such a huge idea, multifaceted. So this is still evolving, first. Second, me, kind of like I said, was introduced to Mr. Vargas through a mutual friend who does Korean martial arts, and his name's Mr. Grau out in Wisconsin. But so it was a very different person. He was more versed in different martial arts, where I was more specified within the Japanese and some Chinese martial arts. And we compared notes, and as individuals, we get along pretty well. He laughs at my dumb jokes, and I like his background of dealing with the interesting bits of society. And from that, we kind of came together with the same idea, but from different ends. So Mr. Vargas came from some traditional martial arts background, some combatives backgrounds, and I came from a very strict traditionalist background. Two very different backgrounds, but we came together with, oddly enough, the same kind of a feeling and goal that we wanted to go towards. So.
Yeah, I think, Daniel, it's also important because to answer why we wouldn't just kind of hook up with an existing group. I don't think there are many, if any, groups that really want to do what we do. A lot of people look at us and kind of at first glance, they think of us as a martial arts organization. And that's not it at all. We are not, promoting any one particular martial art. We're not requiring members to be martial artists. We actually have a lot of members that have nothing to do with martial arts at all. And I think it's important to understand that the goal of the group is developing, fostering, and promoting warriorship above all other things. So,
right, not just how to fight, but how to be a complete warrior. Fighting, of course, is an aspect of that.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, and we do, see a lot of things related to martial arts, in our forums and in our talks, because that's an aspect of warriorship, but it's not the only one, and I don't really feel it's the most important one. So our group was really dedicated to promote warriors as a lifestyle, and it's in our tagline. We're training warriors for the battlefield of life. I don't want to go, get too far into it. I'm sure we might touch on it again in the future in the talk here. But one of the reflections I had, I had kind of retired from teaching, and I looked at who I taught, and I'd keep in touch with the guys. And a lot of these guys, I felt I did my job as far as getting them ready for a back alley street fight. But these guys were making like the worst life decisions they could make.
Right.
I had members of the, in my group that were, cheating on their wives and being really irresponsible at work, getting a bad rep at work. And it really hit home when one of my, top students, the second black belt I ever graduated out, and he was the person that actually had inherited, the operations of Raven Tactical, actually took his own life. And it was, him in a crisis, a stage of his life where he, felt like that was what he needed to do. And it just really hit home with me. And I said, you know what? Did I fail him? Did I not teach him what he needed to know to get through that hurdle in life? And I said to myself, you know what? Never again. You know what? There's a billion people out there that can teach you how to punch and kick. There's a martial arts school in every strip mall across America. Anybody can teach you how to fight. I'm not Yoda.
It reminds me of an old saying, knowledge without wisdom is like riding a horse without reins. And if you're here to sort of help provide the reins for people who might not have it through this warrior mentorship type of stuff.
Exactly. And I don't put myself on a pedestal above anybody else. I do think I'm blessed to have, my feet kind of firmly planted on the ground and walking the path. And I just want to help people to walk with me. And just kind of guide them and let them know where the path is and whatever I can do to help. And again, like I said, it's not any of that Hanjiro or myself being above anybody. I think we learn from each other and we learn from the group as much as the group learns from us.
Okay. Yeah, you had mentioned that you definitely want to talk about those 7 paths of warriorship. And that's up to you if you want to talk about that now or if you want to save that for now. But I think this might be a good time then. What do you think, what is a warrior? What are those 7 paths that you think you guys, are helping people to understand through this organization?
Well, Hanjiro, do you want to talk a little bit about your perspective on what a warrior is?
My perspective comes from, like I say, it's pretty straightforward and simple. I'm between 2 societies, like kind of Japanese society. I'm not saying that's traditional, older, whatever. It's just Japanese. And then American society, which is very multicultural, and Japanese society is very homogeneous, one type. And like Mr. Vargas said, the idea to make this organization was to use martial arts as one aspect of the tribe, but maybe not even the most important one. But it's something that we have in common. It's something that is a good focal point, even if it's kind of like, one analogy is like the tent pole for the rest of the tent. It's not the only one, but it's one of them, and it's something that affects all the rest. So with that said, my background is in traditional martial arts, older style, with a long time spent poo-pooing other styles and then saying, okay, I'll physically prove the inadequacies of these other styles, and did so physically for a long time. And then seeing rise of social media and discussions, and just all of this becomes useless. Like, it does nothing, does nothing to help, a community to grow. And it's only within putting these lessons in a tangible way for someone to learn them and use them to help guide their life. I've similar things, people that I've trained with that have gone down different paths. Some stay in, some leave, some live, some do not. Some are well balanced, some go absolutely batshit crazy. It's the run of the mill. It really is. And to be kind of on a level-headed path as an individual is very unusual. You see maybe 50% of the people just lose it outright within the first few years, and they get bent, and it's very hard to come back from that. And then some people over time just doesn't work out. So we both see that. We both understand it from different paths, kind of, different backgrounds. But it's odd how many things that Mr. Vargas and I have seen that are so similar and coming from different backgrounds. And that's really kind of how we started to get along. And a lot of nonverbal communication and understanding of these kind of issues where we seem to be pretty similar. So that's really my short end of it.
Yeah, and Daniel, I mean, to talk about warriorship, and warrior is a word that people will define differently. And I have to admit that I've somewhat co-opted the word to mean what I want it to mean. I have decided, looking at the word warrior, and you see warrior as a word, and then you see a lot of adjectives. A noble warrior, a bold warrior, a brave warrior. There's a lot of things that you can add to it, and I kind of think of it as warrior is a word that already encompasses the best of those adjectives. So you don't describe a warrior as a heroic warrior. Just by saying a warrior, that's enough. Hanjiro, what do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's very similar. Just only from the Japanese perspective, it's a good reflection of how I feel and illustrates a little bit. The term samurai comes from a verb, sabureru, which means to serve. So the idea is samurai is a whole within that society produced nothing. Like they were not merchants. They didn't broker food. They weren't farmers. They didn't produce food. They were on top of that, and they were supposed to be the shepherd of society. It wasn't just that they were the military overlords. The term sabureru, or turning into samurai, right, was something that is supposed to mean that they are in service to all of those around them. And that's how I came to this. And socially, we're born human. We're all human beings, hopefully. And we're all born, and we have struggle right away, whether it's, with a firearm or with it's putting food in our mouths or feeding our kids or making sure that we don't, slip up and end up in a box. It's a struggle, and it can be an active struggle or a passive struggle. To do it as best as we can as human beings to hopefully spread the DNA in the correct direction and through hopefully natural selection, not wading into the shallow end of the gene pool and further refining ourselves as human beings to a greater goal. These are things that it gets bogged down in semantics of, who's doing this, how's it being done, rather than just saying, I believe I'm a good person. I look at my brother and I say, I believe he's a good person. I might not agree with everything, but somehow we feel in our hearts that we're going down the same path. And we look at the differences that we have, the similarities, and the things through those that help further what we have to do, and we do it. And hell be damned. We're all afraid, we're all frail, we all got problems, but pick it up and go on. That's how it is.
Sure. I mean, people who are attracted to martial arts, I don't want to make generalizations, but we're often prone to volatile natures. I know when I was younger and I was initially drawn to the martial arts, it was because I lost a fight and I wanted to, get back at them for it. And it was through the martial arts and the teacher I had that helped me to not just have discipline, but to see the world a different way. So it wasn't about, just beating somebody up. And I think maybe Raven Tribe, one of the things that makes it special in that sense is that, there's a lot of schools out there where people go and they learn maybe, a sport art or something, and they don't really get that warrior mentality of honor, of code, of keeping things social. So I guess, maybe if I'm interpreting that correctly, what I'm saying here with what you're saying, there's been a lot of cultures in history that have those codes, and they're for a reason, to help the society. Is that kind of what you're aiming at, is to sort of, not necessarily create a code, but to help codify things for people who don't have that? So it's not just about how to throw a punch or how to shoot a gun. To use that more as a draw to bring them into it.
It's definitely something that we are trying to do, Daniel, and it's not so much a draw as a necessity. Throwing a punch in anger is the easiest thing in the world. I just had a conversation with and I find myself, and I don't mean this to be condescending in any way, but I often have talks with my children. And I feel like the lessons I have to teach my children are kind of the way I have to break it down to people that are my students. And I talked to my son, and we were talking about, some situations at school and bullies and things. And I said, son, the easiest thing in the world is to criticize somebody else, to pick on that person, to mock that person. That is the easiest thing you can do. I said, loving somebody else and trying to help somebody else, that's the hardest thing you can do. And because
Right.
it's the hardest
it's
thing.
so much easier to bring people down than to climb over them, right?
Absolutely,
Sorry.
absolutely. Yeah, and so and I come from a Christian background, and the tribe is by no means a Christian organization, but I think that those values are somewhat universal. And as we're talking about codes, Hanjiro may look at Bushido as a code. I have a dear friend, James Smith may look at the Asatru code as, the way he lives his life. But if you look at all these codes, they're pretty universal. A lot of things are going to be, common. There's a lot of common threads. And for myself, and just for the sake of, some utility, we opted to use the 7, virtues. And I refer to them as the 7 paths. And, when you hear me refer to somebody as a path walker, what I mean is it's somebody that's trying to, work those virtues into their daily life, better themselves through, applying these virtues. For people out there listening that are not familiar with them, the virtues are basically, the 7 virtues are prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, faith, love, and hope. And every day I try to, identify my behaviors in that context. If I have a difficult moment, I'll say, what do I need? Let me go to my checklist. Am I being, prudent enough in making this decision? Am I being loving enough in dealing with a difficult person? And these are things that once you become conscious of them, they become very easy to utilize and do allow you a framework in which to, better yourself and better your interactions with other people.
I think that's actually really important and beautiful, because a lot of those there's a big resurgence now in Asatru and similar faiths, and I think part of that is because our society as a whole, because we're moving more towards a secular society. Not that you necessarily have to have religion, but without that support structure of codification of morality and proper activity, people can lose sight. Of course, they can lose sight even with that framework beneath them. But if people like you and others, Hanjiro and the rest of the Raven Tribe, promote these ideas, I think it's the anvil's hot right now, so to speak. I think people are very receptive to that, and I think that's important. So you believe that each one of these paths, is this something that you would, in a situation like you said, you'd say, am I being prudent enough? Am I approaching this person with enough love? Do you think that's the only paths that belong in Raven Tribe, or is that just your example, the ones that you like to exemplify when you're dealing with the tribe itself?
I personally chose this because it resonates with myself. Like I said, I'm a Christian. That's my background. That's where my faith is, and this ties directly to my faith. With that said, there are people from every walk of life, from every nation of the world, that exemplify these same virtues without ever have even known what a Christian is. So I don't think it's something that you need to be a Christian to, implement. I think that good people, anywhere they are, will reflect these values in one form or another. And so to answer you just kind of briefly, I don't think it's something that you need to be a Christian to do. The best of us will be doing these things, regardless of what background we come from.
Okay. Yeah, you don't have to be Asatru, you don't have to be. Yeah, go ahead, Hanjiro.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. You're starting to elucidate a point that I'm just going to say slightly. These 7 virtues are things that are not universal. They're not specific. They're universal by religion, by spirituality. And both Mr. Vargas and I early on came to the understanding that under the idea that we don't know everything, that we'll be open to everything, and these virtues are a minimum kind of thing that we use as an idea and a guide, but with the conscious thought of there may be something else that we're not seeing. And that comes under hope, like hoping that we understand everything, hoping that we get everything, and hoping that if we don't get everything, that whatever is out there that we are ignorant of will be shown to us. Right? So that's one part, but also the universal idea of human nature, human interaction, all of those kind of things that these virtues help is the idea of universal truth. Like you can take a sport art and you can imbue it with these spiritual or these guidelines and make that just as true as 1,000-year-old samurai art, as long as you use truth as the guidance. Like, you don't put unreality in there. Like, some jumping spin kick is going to take a guy off a horse. Okay, it may or may not. But if you do a jumping spin kick 1,000 times, you're going to be stronger. You're going to have better cardio, and that will help you, control your body enough to where you can take your mind and put it on learning these virtues, because you won't have that fear of, a lion jumping out or a horde of zombies taking you on, whether that's real or not. The actual technique itself is true enough as to what it does to your body, which will help in turn all the other stuff. So that universal truth is a big one, but that's the thing that we found between Mr. Vargas and I, is that these sevenfold path, it's the idea of truth helping guide those things. It's universal, comes across all over.
Yeah, and Hanjiro brings up... No, it doesn't have to be esoteric. I mean, Hanjiro brings up a good point. I mean, look at the jumping spin kick is a good example. You know what? I don't care what anybody says. For somebody to be able to do a jumping spin kick correctly, with power, with grace, that takes a lot of diligence. It takes a lot of fortitude. It takes a lot of hope, to get through those lessons, because I'm sure they're not easy. People think that, you have to be some kind of, monk to get this, and you don't. One of my favorite franchises, in history is the Rocky franchise. Watch Rocky with an open mind. Rocky is about a spiritual journey. That you don't get more spiritual than Rocky. I mean, that can exemplify everything that we're talking about right here. And it's a guy in a gym in Philly. It's not about, some Shaolin monk somewhere, or Tibetan Buddhist, hiding up in a mountain. People tend to think that, if you were talking about spirituality, it's this weird abstract thing. It's not. It can be very much a part of everyday life.
Sure, yeah. It reminds me of Alan Watts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him at all. But back in the 40s and 50s, he expanded on a lot of these principles. And one of the messages he had, I'm going to butcher it, of course, was basically that a lot of these things that people do as part of these traditions are almost to a game. They're almost to remind you of the truth. That it's not futile, but it's not something you have to work towards. Being a good person is something that actually comes very naturally. It's all the other stuff you have to get rid of. You have to get rid of the distractions that make you bad. You have to get rid of the things that make you forget the enlightenment. And these virtues that you talk about, these paths that you talk about, are almost like ways to, head in that direction, to cut away the distractions that make you forget this truth, that you are a good person deep down inside, for the most part. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, that's starting to lead down one of the largest stumbling blocks that we have in an organized society, and studying organized martial arts as a possibility is, again, going back to universal truth, and these stumbling blocks is, if these arts or the things that you're studying are not kept with an open mind of the idea of universal truth, then the small semantics, the small details will lead you astray. And I'll use the thing of Bushido. Bushido was historically not a widespread code. That was something that was propagated by the Japanese government in the early 1900s to help further their militaristic goals, in East Asia. It has its basis in history and somewhat reality, but there's a bunch of stuff that was added in that contradicts the historical influences of warrior culture in Japan, especially in Bushido's, like your adherence to the emperor, like you die for the emperor, all of your allegiances to the emperor. Historically, no. Your first allegiance is to your parents. Right. Your parents and your families first. And that's something that was corrupted and changed by government. And this is showing the wickedness of falseness that you want to eschew, but you don't have to be, screaming and yelling about it. You just be patient and keep an open mind, and all of those things will just fall away. So that's, again, avoiding the pitfalls of, these small semantics that can lead us astray.
Right. Like duty is I guess is a part of that, right? If I'm using the term correctly.
Yeah, duty. But the writing, and again, the smallest detail, the writing and the understanding of of duty is not like, American Western culture thinks of duty as an obligation to where, you, for some strange reason, sorry if I call it strange, for some reason, feel as though you're motivated that you have to do something. Giri also has the idea that you're simply born with the need to have some drive towards some goal. It could be not something that you feel indebted. It's not something that you feel as though you have to do, but it's something that you're just born to do. Like I said, as human beings, we should aspire to, further our evolution, right? So that's Giri. It's on a much, much bigger macro level than this micro level of somebody gave me $100, so I got to pay him back 102, and show him that, all that kind of stuff. That's the small differences in these things. But rather than get bogged down in all that, like academics do, we try and take a bigger view of things and use the spiritual guidance to help further all the other stuff.
Sure. And you mentioned getting distracted by these little semantical details and so on. A lot of that goes on. I'm going to bring us back to martial arts for a second. There's a lot of controversial martial arts out there. There's a lot of people who claim lineage to a system that they don't belong to. There's a lot of people who say that's the wrong way to do something. I think I heard a joke on the tribe actually said, how does how's a martial artist change a light bulb? And one guy changes it, and the other 9 guys say how it wouldn't work in the street and all that. And how do you guys confront that? How do you guys deal with the controversial subjects of what works, from a warrior mentality? How do you guys deal with that? I know you guys try to keep an open mind, but what if someone comes along with something that you just feel is just not good or just doesn't work? How do you integrate that respectfully? How do you deal with it?
Well, I think you have to kind of draw a line somewhere. And I'll give you an example. If you are, Joe Blow, and you come to me and you tell me that you're the inheritor of some secret Shaolin fighting system that, left China and went to Tibet and then went to Korea, and that's where you learned it from, Mr. Yamamoto, the Japanese guy that moved in next door, you may believe that, okay? I've had a lot of contact with people that have been, floored and devastated because they became disillusioned with their instructors upon learning that, lineages were faked, kind of, things were exaggerated. And for a long period of time, these guys would operate, in good faith, and they didn't know any better. You unfortunately have people that fall into that category, and then you have, the shysters that make things up. I think it's something that is revealing of character, and if I need to embellish and I need to, create this, fantastic backstory to try to feel important, that is something that could be, a sign of, you being a shyster, you being somebody that wants to take advantage of other people. You're a predator. You want to take their money. Other people, though, may do it for the attention. They may want to fit in, and they just try really, really hard. In a situation like that, I look at a person like that and I said, you know what? You don't need another guy knocking you. I'm sure you're going to get enough of that on Bullshido or someplace else. And you know what? You don't need that. You need somebody to tell you it's okay just to be who you are. And just it's okay to say, hey, I don't know everything. I'm here to learn. I think that a lot of times people just need to hear that stuff. One thing that actually happened a couple of years ago, I started to talk to my mom, actually. My mom's a psychotherapist. And I said, Mom, I got all these guys that reach out to me and talk to me, because of my association. And they sound like they're just like the worst, like fraudulent people in the world. I said, but sometimes I feel like they believe their own shtick. And she said to me, you know what? They may very well believe their own shtick. And she went on to explain to me how delusions, do occur, and delusional behavior occurs and can often be, really cemented in by trauma. And I started to think about it, and, you hear stories and gossip about people. And sure enough, a good number of these guys had been through some very unfortunate and traumatic events in their lives. And that kind of delusion became a coping mechanism for them. I remember one guy that told me that he was an FBI agent, and he worked. Oh, wow. Yeah, he was an FBI agent, but he worked with somebody that I knew, in like a store. And I'm like, okay, you're not an FBI agent, but he really wanted to, that delusion somehow gave him comfort. And I knew from friends of friends that, he had gone through some really bad things. So I think that, again, you know what, you got to approach people to a certain level until you kind of figure out what their motivations are. I mean, a crook's a crook's a crook. And if that's what your, motivation is and that's what you're doing, you cannot be part of the tribe until you kind of correct that behavior. And I'll tell people, like, hey, you know what, you just need to kind of cut out some of that bullshit and, set yourself straight, because that's what we're all trying to do, is be straight with everybody else. So you don't have a place here until you get that stuff in order. Other people may need a little bit of a softer hand and may need some understanding and some love. So I think that it's kind of a case-by-case basis. You have to be real careful with how you deal with people.
Right. Some people are just outright lying, and some people are trying to make something work that maybe they need more time to develop for themselves, or maybe they are, like you said, looking for attention. Exactly. Okay. Let's see. Are you guys still there? It kind of cut out for a second there.
No, we're still here.
Yeah. Okay, good. I just kind of went dead for a second there. All right, so the next question is, when I think of the word tribe, you chose the word tribe for a reason. And is there a reason you chose tribe over clan or over, fraternity or any other possible word? What was your reason for choosing tribe? I mean, I have my opinion why I think you did it, but I'd like to hear yours.
All right.
Go ahead. Hanjiro.
No, I was just going to say I ruled out fraternity early because I didn't want to be seen as either a drunken frat boy, and I can't do keg stands anymore, and I don't work well with fraternal Italian organizations of ill repute. So I don't know, but we had a long discussion about this. I think Mr. Vargas probably has clearer explanation of it, but we talked about this a lot.
Well, I think that, if you look up tribe in the dictionary, it's going to tell you something, to the effect of people, common customs, common beliefs, and common character. And I think maybe one of the things that comes out most for me is that common character. There's a lot of fraternities. There's, Elks Club and, the Kiwanis Club, and you can join a lot of groups that do a lot of good things, but those are people that have maybe a similar character. One thing that is across the board similar between all the members of the tribe is that warrior character. Again, not to kind of keep rehashing it, but, we talk about what is a warrior.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, but, I give different definitions at different times, depending on what's in my mind here. But one simple definition of what a warrior is, somebody that says no when everybody else is saying yes. Okay, somebody with that courage to stand up. And again, it doesn't have to be physical, but it's that inclination, it's that character. I mean, warriors, regardless of where they come from, what era, what country, if they're, trained soldiers or housewives, they have that spark in them. And that's what we are. We're a warrior tribe. We have that similar character. We're not a warrior, social club. We're not the warrior, organization. We're a tribe. We share this common belief, and that extends into the way we interact with each other. And, another aspect of it is just that interaction like family. I mean, there's people that are in this tribe that, I trust with my life before I would trust some of my family members. There's an old saying, it's, family are the people that treat you like family. And all of us, I'm sure, have like that one Uncle Jimmy or Cousin Bobby that, is not the good guy and you don't want nothing to do with him. And, you don't get to pick, who your blood relations are, but you can pick your family in the sense that family are the people that treat you like family. And if you surround yourself with people that have the common goals and the common character, that makes you a tribe.
Yeah, I think
so if people, go ahead. Sorry.
No. The only thing I was going to stipulate was that I think we had a good part of the conversation is to look at the word tribe and what that affects and what that doesn't affect. And like Mr. Vargas said, there's a lot there. The only thing I would add is that regardless of religion or further evolved nature of our society, tribe is like very basic. It's like a band of people. There's a bunch of things that influence that, but it's just a band of people. It comes from societies that are very basic, like Stone Age societies, to more evolved societies. But that's the one unit of, other than family, which again we're talking about family as tribe, that is consistent from Neolithic times up until today. Those things still are made, hence we're doing it. So.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head the whole time. I mean, the tribe is a basic thing, and basic things tend to work. You know, they tend to be effective for a long time. So it's not because of Native American culture or anything like that. It's not, you know, just so people don't get confused who might not be aware of this. This is not like open only to Native Americans who identify with ravens or something like that. This is a group of people who have a social bond based upon their like qualities.
Yeah, very much so.
So that leads me to the next part. Why the raven? Why not bear? Why not dragon? Why not lightning bolt? You know, why raven? What exactly does the raven say to you? Why did you choose the raven?
Well, I think that the raven is something that is symbolic in a lot of different ways, and cross-culturally, it has a lot of different attributes attributed to the raven, a lot of symbolism to what the raven is. When I personally looked at the raven, I looked at, like you said, why not the bear tribe? Why not the tiger tribe? Well, you know what? I'm not the biggest, strongest guy. I'm not the fiercest warrior on the block. So I wasn't going to be the tiger tribe. I wasn't going to be the grizzly bear, the shark tribe. But you know what? I'm the thinking man. And the raven is, throughout history and folklore, the raven is smart. The raven knows how to use strategy. The raven knows, a lot more than the other animals do. And that's something that we kind of always prided ourselves on, that we're thinking rational people, that we use critical thinking, that if we can't beat you with strength, we'll find a way to do it. And that reflects to life. You know what? Regardless of what happens, the raven's going to get a meal. The raven's going to find a way to survive. I mean, they're surviving animals, and their intellect is off the charts. So that's kind of what we were. We were people that will overcome adversity no matter what. You can get into a lot of folklore about, Nordic folklore, Native American folklore, but all of those things, are attributes that definitely reflect our kind of mindset on surviving and getting ahead in the world. Hanjiro, I know that, you've had conversations with me about how in Japan some of these animals are looked at that you wouldn't think of, like the rat or the raven. What do you think about this?
Well, in its traditions are very, very similar. The idea of the raven is that it's an unspecified animal. Just like us as human beings, we don't have armor. We don't have an offensive or defensive capability that we're born with, some kind of weaponry or armor or whatever. We're pretty frail. The only thing that we've got is this general adaptable idea of intellect. We can learn and change. And crows are the same way. They're not built like a duck where they can lift off and take off very quickly. And they're not built like a hawk for just straight on speed, or like an eagle with huge talons. They're kind of a mixed bag. They don't have any specialized ability, but they have just enough of all of those physical attributes that if they use their intellect, then they can do it. And that's kind of how we are. It's, as the old Japanese say, victory by all means necessary. And that means all means necessary, and that means not all means possible, So there is some limitation. That limitation is what we use through like our virtues and through, social and guidance of justice and those kind of things to do what we have to do. So that's probably the best way of looking at it.
Yeah, and Daniel, I think it's something I've reflected in private on a lot, is kind of looking back at that concept of common character. And if you look in the Raven tribe, even if you just kind of peruse the Facebook group, you're going to see guys that use the name Raven. Benjamin Raven, who came on the show not too long ago to talk about, spirituality. Raven Kane, who's a regular on the show. Pablo Salinas is often, using the word Raven in his names, his pen names and things like that. It's a lot of different people that were working totally independent of each other, all kind of came to that same totem, if you want to call it that, of the raven. They all identified with, this concept of what the Raven is and what it means, and they emulate that in a way in their lives. They're all adaptable people. They're all survivors. They're people that are thinking and rational, and are going to use that to their advantage and to benefit other people as well. So I think that it's just an interesting thing that you bring it up because it does kind of speak to that common character. I don't think there's one person in that group, whether they use the name in some variation or use that imagery, that doesn't relate to that, kind of archetype of what the Raven is.
Yeah, I mean, I chose my Facebook last name, Laughingbird, and I did have, intelligent Laughingbird, crow, raven, because where I work, we actually have crows that kind of laugh at us all the time. They kind of go, ah, 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 all the time. So I said it kind of reminds me of how I see myself, and I get that, what you're saying. That makes sense. And also, the Japanese have the tengu. Aren't they also a raven-based creature in mythology, or was it just birds? I forget. I don't want to sidetrack this too much.
Well, my only experience with the tengu was from the Power Rangers movie, so I'm going to have to defer to Hanjiro on this one.
Nice. Yes. No, it's as far as actual cultural truth, it's probably as true as Mr. Vargas just said. The history is too murky to really ascribe it to one bird, but they do ascribe most of the attributes, like perseverance, kind of a mystical nature that is inspecific. It's not like they have huge claws or powerful or anything. It's that intelligence and use of perseverance. That's how come they're also very, not just because of their folklore roots and their mystical stuff, but because of their use of perseverance specifically to overcome obstacles or to achieve things, that ninja groups tended to use them as kind of a mythical means of explaining their origin stories. There's stuff that I know doctoral students in Japan have done research on and all that. This takes up a lifetime. So yeah, the idea is it's not so much the one bird, it's the idea of the things that we've already talked about that are the attributes that we look forward to that are imbued by Tengu. And just the physical thing is, they wear these crazy looking masks and they have wings and they're the patrons of many famous battles and martial artists and that kind of stuff. But realistically, again, it's one of those things that has no one origin point. It's very many origin points, and I think it's emblematic of the Raven, where it's not just one thing; it's the many things that it uses for success. But getting back to the Laughingbird, it's many times in practice that I've had crows calling out and laughing, and I'll say, to my training partner, whatever, you're doing something really effed up when the birds are laughing at you.
That's great. So now, shifting gears again, what do you guys see as the goals for the tribe in the next year, we'll say? We'll keep it short term. In the next year, what would you like to see happen within the tribe? Do you want to see meetings? Do you want to see tournaments? Or do you want to just see people becoming better people? What is exactly you want to see? If there was like a way you could measure success, what would you point to and say, we did that? That's our goal for this year. And that's open to both of you.
That's big. Big. Well, go ahead, Mr. Vargas.
Well, I think to begin with, I'd like to see more of the members, of the social media groups actually start to interact more and participate. We've had a lot of people join up and, follow the social media groups. They follow the website and the YouTube channel. And that's great because I think it gets people, at least kind of acclimated to what we're doing out there. But in the future, I'd like to see people actually starting to get together. This is a tribe, and tribes don't exist on a keyboard and a monitor. That's just not the way things work in real life. To get the maximum benefit out of what this tribe is meant to be, people need to start connecting. And so we want to start seeing the senior members start to build, their bands and, their chapters locally, start getting people together. And as a group, eventually, we'd like to get, multiple bands together, multiple chapters and run activities and do different things, have talks, have training. But for the most part, I think within the next year, the goal is to start to get people, off their butts, off the computer, and, get them out there together, being together. That's the most important thing. Hanjiro, you got some thoughts on that?
Well, we just actually talked about this for the past couple of days, you and I. Yeah, that's the first thing, and we're planning right now the best structure in order to do that without things getting too unwieldy. It's just like any process that gets too big, it bogs down and becomes slow. Just like a raven, we're trying to keep this nimble and kind of hand to mouth, very, very relevant and very immediately felt, if not just effective, something that's felt right away, that elicits response, that gets people moving, that does that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I got your back now, so you got New York covered. All right, so what about, like the tournament idea, that's not really something you guys want to do, right? That's not like, because again, this isn't about martial arts, in case you didn't get confused. It's not just martial arts, I should say. So having fighting competitions and all that kind of stuff is not really what you're aiming at. It's more like meeting up and talking and sharing experiences and things.
Well, we are a warrior tribe, and we do think that training is important. I mean, I said at the top of the hour that training is not mandatory for members, but it's highly encouraged, and I think we need to do that. With that said, it's more of something where we can get together and learn and exchange notes. The day-to-day training is going to be something that's a responsibility of any individual member and the individual chapter, to organize and run those kind of things. As far as like competitions and things like that, what's the point? There's a gazillion places to go do that, and I don't mean to sound flippant, but it's just, what's the point? You can go anywhere and do that. You can sign up for, MMA classes anywhere, and people get you fights, and there's plenty of avenues to do that thing. I don't think there's as many avenues to come and talk about, your spirituality. This is a platform that can help people that otherwise may not be able to connect to that aspect of their personality. I'll share something personal with you. I'm a Christian. I'm a very devout Christian. I have never in my life been able to sit in a church and feel comfortable. And that may seem ridiculous, but it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't resonate. I don't feel it. And I struggled with that for a long time, and I was like, why don't I feel this? I believe in God. I love God. I read the Bible. I believe in these teachings. Why can't I sit in a pew and feel gratified and feel that I've connected? You know what? It's that common character. That's not my character. All of us, we're warriors. We need a little something different to connect. And and I can find my spirituality and my connection, to God through brotherhood and through service. And, that's really, what we can do together. That's much, much more important than giving each other black eyes.
Sure. And it kind of goes back to what Hanjiro said at the beginning, when you started off in this, how you put it, this insulated martial art. I assume, maybe you guys didn't have a lot of tournaments, but there was always this competitive nature, I'm sure, where we're better than you. And you don't want that to happen, right, Hanjiro? You don't want that to come into the tribe where people say, the Wisconsin group is better than the Chicago group, and you want it to be something else.
Yeah, yes, and the method that this happens has to be accepted as we keep each other safe and we keep each other thinking towards the future. And I'm a great physical example of this. I use when my kids, tend to get into fights or disagreements, I point to my own body and I can show them, broken hands, fractured collarbone, broken ribs, split skull, crushed eye socket, all these things where I can say, listen, this is why you don't do this.
Sure.
So for longevity, for physical longevity, that's one reason. Mr. Vargas and I slightly differ on this, that if, I'm not being flippant, but if somebody wants to issue me a proper challenge and sign it with a hunko and then blood initial it and give it to me and present it properly, then fine.
Right?
Yeah, in a very private setting to where they want to challenge me, that's not a problem.
Well, I mean, the challenge should be public, right? The challenge public and the venue can be private.
These things are generally done very privately in order to avoid showmanship. Traditionally in Japanese structure, that's done. But that's personally me. However, I defer to the greater good that if somebody needs to further themselves within the group, to take a beating or give a beating, I'll take a beating, no problem, within reason. Then if that helps them get past that need to do that and become more cooperative and, competitive with a better, more active, more appropriate competitiveness for longevity, for life, then I'm all for it. That's just me, though. But then within the tribe, I say, this may not be for everyone, and everybody else's, feeling within the tribe might not go for this. So the better idea is harmony for everyone. And if you want to do it, I'm okay with it, but not everyone's going to do that. So that's kind of where we're figuring out where different chapters can behave moderately differently, but ascribe to the greater tribe and the greater tribe's ideals and not deviate from that. So as an example, I had a challenge maybe 2 months ago where I had a person, put down, and then they said, okay, they wanted to use wood in a challenge with sword. And I explained to him, wood means that you're giving me the possibility that you're going to try and kill me. Like, this is a weapon that could really injure me. If you don't want that, you can choose bamboo, which it will hurt like hell and leave marks, but it's not going to kill anybody. And he said, no, that's fine. We'll take the wood. And I let him hit at me a couple of times and get very, very close before I broke all the bones in his left hand. And then said, those will heal, but, you're going to be crippled. That's how it is. Deal with it and don't ever do that again. And I just heard from him yesterday. He's probably going to be a regular student. But the idea is that's kind of an extreme, but that kept it from being far too more extreme. And that's kind of what we want to do with certain people who are willing to be a part of the tribe, is to remove these extreme ideas that definitely hurt the tribe and bring them more into the tribe and the tribe's ideals. And the idea of service to the community is something that won't hurt the community. Yeah, just in summation, no matter, whatever's on the tape or not, essentially some competition I agree with. The form of which it's done has to be something that's conducive to the group. And that could be anything from, competing in a chess match, figuratively, to, some kind of sword thing. But it's not competition in the way of there's a winner and a loser. It's competition to push our boundaries and push each other, and then afterwards sit down, have a drink, or have, communal time together. That kind of competition.
Kind of like what Dog Brothers have done in the past. I don't know if they still do that, but yeah, they have, I think, a similar outlook on it. What kind of person should be considered? Like if I was trying to recommend somebody for Raven Tribe, what should I be looking for? Obviously, it's open to a lot of people. It's not like you're trying to be exclusive or anything. But if I was trying to encourage somebody to join Raven Tribe, is there anything I should look for? Or if I was thinking about joining Raven Tribe, what should I ask myself before I really, obviously everyone should try it, but I'm saying, is there anything I should be aiming for?
Just a desire to want to be more than you are today.
Yeah, I agree with that. That, and with that desire, the desire to learn. So sometimes I've found, because I went through ego and everything else, that sometimes the only thing that I could do was just learn to shut up. That's it. That's all. The desire to learn or be a better person, and then just sometimes shut up. That's it.
Just learn to shut up, right? Okay, just a couple more questions. We're doing pretty good here. What would you say would be a martial art that is not very well represented in the tribe? I've heard, actually, through these podcasts you've been doing, all kinds of different things, from HEMA guys to, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese. Is there any martial art, even African, I forget his name, he had a great show. Is there any martial art or style or culture that you feel isn't represented fully, or needs more representation in the tribe? Where should you reach out in that direction?
Let's do a water park. You hold it up high.
I don't know, Mr. Vargas, where you want to go with this one?
To be honest, I don't think it matters, really, in the sense that, we encourage people to train. We've taken a position that we're not going to tell you what to train. We may give you some guidelines or give you some goals to meet through whatever training that you're doing. So I think that, any particular style, it's just going to be preference of the individual. I mean, I would love to see a myriad of different systems and styles, because that way there's just more to learn from, more perspective, varied perspective. But I don't think it's all that necessary to dictate or to encourage any one style of martial arts over another. Hanjiro, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I definitely feel that way. And when you're trying to target a representative, system or something like that, you have to deal with the source of who it's coming from. And that's the other thing that needs to be said, is the source of the material that we put on the podcast are guys who are considered to be very orthodox, representatives of the styles, and some guys who are seen as a little controversial for a number of reasons. And we try and give all of them some mouthpiece and not comment on them directly, but learn from it. Learn from it in a positive, or from, the negative manners, to a critical thought of sometimes the message can come from a flawed individual or from a flawed teacher, but the message may be great, and then vice versa. The teacher may be an absolute charlatan, but what he's teaching may be real. And so you need to learn to put aside your personal bent towards it. Like for me with Japanese martial arts, anytime somebody busts out I'm an expert in this, and I'll say, I sure as hell hope you speak Japanese, because I'm going to really be interested in this. And, sometimes I have to put that aside and say, yeah, this guy may have just created his own martial art, but why did he do it? How did he do it? Who's he getting to follow this? Where is he going to go with this? Maybe he's going to progress and do something amazing. So all of them, all of these martial arts, we look at it in that way. It's not just the message coming out, it's the person and how it's being done, all these things. So like Mr. Vargas said, it's going to be everybody, a little of everything.
Right, and that's an interesting point. I mean, it's not just tactical, or I should say, it's not just modern. It's also, traditional stuff. And even some of these people who don't have legitimate lineages and things, as you said, maybe they got information from a legitimate source and they're repeating it. But sometimes what they're saying is true, or maybe somehow they're, I guess you could say, interpreting it in a way that makes sense, especially in a modern time. I don't want to name names of any people I'm considering, but there are people out there who published books in the past, and that they're not legitimate styles of what they're talking about. However, the guiding principle that they're espousing is kind of within that style, and they're not wrong in the things that they're telling you to do, per se. They're just wrong to say that it comes from that. So that's interesting to me a lot. I don't know if that's going to interest people about the Raven Tribe very much. I think it might, because people can feel free to express their own martial art. If you're someone like me who's had 6-7 years of training in art, and you want to share that with the world without having somebody coming down on you all the time about where's your black belt and where's this and what's your grandmaster's name and such, and you just want to say, well, I developed this, and you guys are open to that. And I think that's actually kind of something that's lacking today in modern martial arts. Maybe that's just my interpretation. Whenever I look on the internet, it's very much about lineage and style, and obviously you need to have some credentials and some believability and things like that. But I see in the tribe this willingness to say, okay, is that a useful method, and does it apply to the warrior principles? And I see you guys embracing that. Would you agree with that interpretation of what I'm saying?
I think so, Daniel. And I think the important thing there, and you kind of mentioned two things I want to touch on, but the important thing in both is the truth of the matter. And truth is really important. I've known people that represented. I've known people that have represented certain things, and they've gone out there, promoted it that way. They've kind of hung out their shingle. I'm part of this. I'm part of this. And in reality, they're not. And what they teach may be great. What they are doing may be totally effective, but again, you have to ask that question about the character of the individual. I find that there's a lot more truth and there's more character to a human being if they say to me, you know what, I boxed in college, I wrestled in high school, I did a stint in the Army and picked up some tricks, and I've been trying to, try my hand at teaching, and I put some of this stuff together. I didn't win any medals. I didn't win any trophies. I don't have, a certificate that says I'm this or that. But they come at you with a very truthful expression of what they want to do. That person's going to have my respect a whole lot more than somebody that, may be phenomenal at martial arts, but knowingly and willingly deceives people. Yeah, Hanjiro?
So yeah, go ahead.
No, that was very well put, and that's something that I didn't really explain earlier on when I made the point about, the messenger and the message. That still the idea and the underlying thing is truth, like we talked about before. The respect part of it for me, it comes from the individual more than the art or more than the message. That's just a personal bent, just because I've seen it far too often, but yeah.
So my last question is kind of a trick question. It's kind of a little different. All these have been kind of on the positive spin. What would you say is something that you regret doing as a tribe, or a mistake you've made, or be brutal with yourself, or whatever? Find a flaw. What would you say is the flaw in the tribe that you'd like to fix, or a regret that you have on it so far? Just to round out the questions.
Well, Hanjiro, you got anything there?
I don't know. I'm always the guy who's like, I didn't do enough. I haven't. And quite honestly, we're both individuals with families and lives outside of martial arts, and that's kind of what makes us who we are, where we have all these things to juggle, and we use the martial arts as kind of a basis in order to inform ourselves on how to do our daily lives. We have religion, we have spirituality. Part of that physical expression of that is, martial arts. For me, it's gardening. Like you can hear me watering the garden now. All of those things. And I just never have enough time. There's never enough time in the day. So my thing is always making sure that I'm doing it enough or doing it properly.
Yeah, I think if I have any regrets with how we've, dealt with the tribe and how we've tried to put things together is, again, like Hanjiro said, maybe not doing enough, for the group, and starting some projects, not maybe following through quickly enough to get the best benefit for the tribe. This is not a moneymaker for Hanjiro or for myself. We don't, really get much of anything out of this financially. If we get enough to kind of cover expenses on a website, that's a win for us. But it's not about that. It's about helping people. So, yeah, I think that kind of weighs heavy once in a while when you get wrapped up in your own lives and, things don't come out as quickly as you want for other people. Because I think both of us really are rooted in that idea of serving other people. And so if we put our shingle out and say, hey, this is a place where we're going to help people, we better come through on that promise.
I can say from my experience with you guys, I don't know what you're talking about, because you guys always seem to be there. I haven't really talked to you before, Hanjiro, but Mr. Vargas, you always seem to be available when I have a question or a comment, or you even come to me and say, how is your practice progressing? How is this going? And so I know what you're saying, but I don't see it. I see you guys actually, you guys are very active, and so don't feel discouraged would be my advice. If you guys are doing well.
That's definitely Mr. Vargas. He's the one who's always reaching out to me too. So he's that guy. He's that guy.
You do.
Yeah.
Okay, so that pretty much does it for all my questions. So I don't know what else you guys want to cover at this point.
Well,
anything else to wrap up, Mr. Vargas?
Daniel, as a tribe member, let me ask you. What's your experience been? We didn't really know each other all that well before you came along the tribe, came across the tribe. What's it been like for you, your experience? What have you gotten out of it? Has it helped you?
Yes. In short, yes. Without going into my whole backstory, which some of it, we talked about some of that last night. When I first heard about the tribe, I was actually kind of in a low spot because of the things that I've been trying to do with my own life. Some people, I'm not going to name anybody, obviously, out there who, have certain perspectives on the martial arts. They kind of attacked me a little bit. And I'm not going to lie, I get sensitive to that because I am trying to be as honest as I possibly can. And if I even feel like I've done something wrong in that direction, then it can hamstring me. It can really hurt my self-confidence. When I go out to do something on the up and up, and then someone accuses me of not doing it, it can definitely choke me up. And you guys are, helping me to see that I didn't do what they're saying at all, and I've been a good person, and my intentions are correct. I'm trying to help people with what I know, and when I don't know something, I try to steer them towards something better. And being able to see other people that are part of a similar organization, all trying to do the same thing. Other artists that have, arts that maybe are controversial to other people, but are still respectable and so on, like you said before. Seeing them doing well within your organization and being comfortable in it. All of these things they're good for me. They're good for a person like me. I'm not a violent person by nature. I have been. I've done security work and bouncing and things like that. And I used to have, I wouldn't say a hair trigger by any stretch, but I certainly would resort to violence sooner. And so I don't need that kind of warriorship. I've already settled into, my late 30s monk phase. I'm already starting to do that. But this other part, this feeling like there are other warriors out there who, surprisingly, a lot of people who have a warrior mindset have a similar sense of justice, of politics, of even something as simple as like your Second Amendment or something like that. A lot of people have a very similar perspective on things. And where I live in New York, you don't get a lot of that. A lot of people here in New York are, I don't think it's liberals or liberalism necessarily, but it's a very different attitude. When you walk down the street and you assert yourself as a warrior type of person, people around here don't want to see that. It's like you're insulting them. So being around people, like you said, you went to church and you didn't feel comfortable. I shouldn't say you didn't feel comfortable, but you felt like it didn't fit right and you needed something a little extra, that warrior element. And that is something that's here. When I listen to you guys have your interviews and your, just the things that you bring up on the Facebook page, I feel like I can express myself when I have, like, occasionally I've done essays in the past, and you guys have all been very receptive and talked about it and thought it was interesting, or I had constructive criticism about it, or whatever it was. And it felt like I was when I was studying actively in my martial art, it felt like I was back in that environment. I felt like I was with people who were trying to help me, not people who were trying to prove they were better than me every time I opened my mouth. And that's something I think that happens a lot in martial arts today. Is you can't demonstrate a technique online without somebody saying there's a better way to do it. And you guys go, that's a really great way to do it. It's a completely different way of doing things. So yes, you guys have definitely helped me. And it's one of the reasons I've tried to, with limited time I have, to help you guys or help you personally when you ask for it. I don't have a lot of money. I can't pay you guys for any instruction you've given me or help you give me or guidance or mentorship. So you're darn right. I'm going to try to help you or the group whenever I can. And I think that's something that helps people too. When you help other people, you help yourself, really. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
No, absolutely. And something for everybody listening. And, you talk about how when you try to assert yourself as a warrior, that aspect of your personality, I shouldn't even say aspect. I think for any of us that are real warriors, that's just who we are, period.
It's just who you are.
It's just who you are. But it can be difficult, and it can feel very solitary at times. Dave Grossman, put it out there, and everybody should know this if they haven't read this. But he talks about sheepdogs and wolves and sheep. And he talks about in society how, there are people that are just sheep, and that's not, being disrespectful to anybody. That's just how they're wired. They're meant to be part of the group. They do what they got to do. They're peaceful, and that's wonderful. Society needs that. You have predators who are the wolves who want to take advantage of the sheep. Sheep don't have claws. Sheep don't have teeth. They're defenseless. And then you have sheepdogs who have claws and have teeth just like the wolves, and they fight on behalf of the sheep. Everybody that's heard that story always gets that part of it. And the part of it that people rarely talk about, that I don't hear them talking about, is the second half of it. When you look at the sheepdogs have teeth, and they have claws, and they can growl and bark and attack. And even though they are on the side of the sheep, sheep still feel uncomfortable around them. It's something that they they just look a little too much like the wolf, for their taste. They just for their comfort zone. And there's times, there's countless times where, I live a very kind of low key life in in my 9 to 5, and I work in a very kind of peaceful profession. It's social service profession, and occasionally somebody will hear the rumor at work and be like, "Oh, you do taekwondo?" And I was like, yeah, kind of, sort of." And that seems to be fine. And then somebody inevitably will stumble across my website, and they're like, Vargas knife fighting. Oh my God, you do that? And it's just it blows it blows it up, and I have to start doing a lot of explaining as to what it is, and I never get looked at the same way twice after that. So it is something that I also can say that I've experienced, that people do become somewhat uncomfortable around you when they realize what you're capable of doing. And that's something that we need to be aware of. And I think that that's a benefit of having a tribe, because again, it's people of like character, people of like beliefs and customs. And you know what? Nobody's going to look at you that way in the tribe. You're going to be looked at as a peer. And, that's what we want. We want a home for people that are walking this path, that are out there, being warriors and not having to hide it or, make apologies for it. Society needs us. That's what they need, people that stand up and say no when everybody else is saying yes. That's part of what being a warrior is, and we need to be there. Hanjiro, do you got anything for me here?
Yeah, and my perspective will be that, as you can hear, I'm walking around the house. Dave, Mr. Vargas, and I both lead pretty low-key lives, but a big part of my schooling within the Japanese martial arts is how to not be noticed by society. Like that was a big thing, and that we don't talk about what we do. We don't have outside influence. We don't do anything with society. That it's very much removing yourself from society. Society will take care of itself, and if it doesn't, then so much the better. Like this is how I was instructed for the most part from those teachers. And so that's another reason why I wanted to be a part of this, was to help explore this avenue and see what this allows. And it wasn't until, meeting and having time with people like Mr. Vargas that I came to understand these things is this is a better way to do this and not isolate yourself. And so it done in the right way, it's better for everyone. And I can't say any of the other observations any better than Mr. Vargas. They're things that I've seen, that I've been able to personally be a part of. And so I know that they're truth, and it stands at that.
All right. Yeah, I hear that. Well, thanks for having me interview you guys. I had a blast. I hope you have me back on sometime in the future, but that was fun. I don't know. Anything else you guys want to say?
Yeah, we got to just say that this is a non-paid promotion. Like, we didn't have you say all of these things because we gave you a boat for that name.
Oh, by the way, did you make my name right on the check or no?
Yeah. That Swiss bank transfer is going to get me nicked by the cops. Thank you.
Yes, and Hanjiro will not destroy your left hand if this, doesn't go well. So,
not yet.
Well, guys, Daniel, thank you for taking time out to talk with us. I know it's a little bit unique to kind of flip the script. I mean, I'm usually the one asking people the questions, but I'm glad we were able to put you in the driver's seat today and actually talk about the tribe. I think we're going to be airing this as our 50th episode of the Raven Talk podcast. Yeah. And I
think I've listened to 35 of them.
Perfect. Well, get on it. You got 15 to go. So, yeah, but it's been great interviewing so many people, but I think it was a good point in time for us to, kind of sit down and talk about what we do, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what the tribe is and what the tribe isn't. And again, like we said at the top of the hour, this isn't a martial arts organization. This isn't, your Lions Club, not taken away from either of those, kind of organizations, but this is a unique tribe of warriors that are looking to better themselves, better their families, community, and do the right thing. Just in summation, just want to reiterate, that warriorship is a lifestyle. It is not, putting on gloves and boxing. It's not, going to war. Those are places where you're going to find warriors, but that's not what warriorship is. Warriorship is living a life that's less ordinary and aspiring to be more, aspiring to, get more out of life for yourself and for your community. So that's definitely what we want to put out there to the people listening, to anybody that's interested in joining the tribe. Come, to our website, theraventribe.com. You can find our social media group. You can find the links to the Raven Talk podcast, and we hope to see you guys there.